Good afternoon. My name is David Demore. I'm the Executive Director of the Lincy Institute in Brookings Mountain West, and I want to welcome you all to the 2025 Robert E. Lang Memorial Fellowship Lecture. Thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to join us today. So after Rob passed in 2021, we established the fellowship to honor his legacy and his incredible contributions to our community here. The fellowship is awarded annually to a UNLV PhD student who's completing a dissertation in public policy, very broadly defined. Rob was, of course, a very strong advocate for graduate education. That's where he did most of his teaching. He was one of the first to make the case for why UNLV should be an R1 institution. Of course, one of the key metrics for R1 is the number of PhDs you graduate. So we structured the fellowship to essentially achieve that goal, right? To be a dissertation completion grant to essentially provide resources and time for the recipients to be able to complete their dissertation. A lot of pressure on you, Emylia. Rob was also a big believer in the importance of public-facing scholarship, and he felt it was the duty of academics to apply their expertise to address challenges facing their communities. If you are familiar with the work of the Lincy Institute in Brookings Mountain West, so much of what we have accomplished has its roots in this room through public convenings, forums, and events that have shaped much of the policy discussions that have occurred in the state for the last decade plus. So the fellowship and the lecture capture Rob's goals of promoting graduate education and applying research to inform public policy. The crumble cookies are a nod to his notorious sweet tooth. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to do some quick thank yous. Thank you, of course, to UNLV TV for recording this event. They record all of our events. This will be available on YouTube, and we will, of course, blast it out after the fact. Thank you, of course, on our team, Caitlin Saladino, Ashley Leclerc for pulling this together. Excellent as always. And lastly, I want to thank the donors to the Robert E. Lang Memorial Fellowship. Without their generous support, this simply would not exist here. Some of you are here today, and thank you so much for being here and for your continued support here. So when we were selecting this year's Lang Fellow, we looked at Emylia's application, and many of the qualities that we look for just jumped right off the page. She has diverse academic training. She completed a triple BA at UNLV. Yeah, a triple BA, yeah. Psychology, history, and gender and sexuality studies, an MA in communications from Johns Hopkins, and soon a PhD in public health. Through her work with the American Cancer Society, legal aid, and legislative affairs, she has plenty of experience in policy advocacy. And as she'll tell you here in a moment, she's also not done with her academic training. There's one more stop. Emylia's dissertation, being completed on the guidance of Jennifer Farr, examines the confluence between the cultural wars issues that are shaping our current political moment and the mental health challenges that were laid bare during the pandemic. Her work highlights the public health costs that result from rhetoric and policies that target sexual minorities for political gain. Combining her PhD work in public health with her master's work in communication and her undergraduate coursework in gender and sexuality studies. So please join me in welcoming Emylia Terry to the stage.
So hi, everybody. Yeah, this is on. Okay, good. I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. I just want to acknowledge that Dr. Robert Lang shaped Nevada in ways that are going to be felt forever. I don't have enough words to thank Dr. Lang, the Lang family and donors who support this fellowship, as well as the Lincy Institute and Brookings Mountain West team. I will work to make you proud and to continue Dr. Lang's legacy here in Southern Nevada. And thank you too for all of you for being here today. So a little bit about me. My mom's already crying. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, and my parents graduated from UNLV, making me a second-generation UNLV alum. I graduated from high school here in Nevada, earned my undergrad from UNLV, and now I will be earning my PhD, and in a few years, my JD here at UNLV. So I really love it here. UNLV has been a pillar for my family, and it's really opened so many doors for all of us. I started to first have a formal language for health disparities when I began working at a nonprofit organization managing programs and services for cancer patients here in town. And some of these services included transportation. At the same time, my grandfather, Poppy, who he's right there, he was my buddy, he was battling late-stage prostate cancer. At work, I would hear all of the time that patients didn't have a ride to treatment. They couldn't afford treatment. And my Poppy's cancer journey, it was very challenging, but my family never had problems with accessing his care, and we were able to work together as caregivers and to take care of him. So the stark contrast between what I was seeing at work and what I was seeing in my own home quickly made me realize that access to care is life or death for many Nevadans. I really started to think about what this meant for the LGBT community that I'm part of. What do disparities look like for us? When I was laid off during COVID, I decided to apply for my PhD in public health a month later, despite having zero formal academic training in this area. But I had lived experience and work experience and determination and passion and grit, and I think those are some of the most powerful prerequisites anybody can have for a program that they're not familiar with. I feel so lucky to have found a home at the UNLV School of Public Health with the best mentors I could ever ask for, especially my committee chair, Dr. Jennifer Farr, who has supported in me and believed in me even from before day one. She's worked tirelessly to advance health equity for LGBT people, and I am so honored that I get to learn from her. Thank you too to my committee co-chair, Dr. Jace Flatt, who leads with integrity and compassion and bravery. In this presentation, I talk a lot about social supports and the difference they make. And I want to start by thanking mine. First, my husband, Jay, who I married this December in the most Vegas way possible, a drive-through wedding. Our dog was our witness. Whenever I'm presented with an opportunity, even if it takes me far outside of my comfort zone, without hesitation, he says, "Do it, I've got you, we'll figure it out." Thank you for inspiring me and supporting me. And also on a side note, he's proofread so many of my papers that he might as well be a PhD candidate too at this point. I also want to thank my amazing family and my chosen family and my friends and my classmates who are now some of my closest friends, and my incredible professors and mentors here at UNLV, and really all of you for being here today. I'd also like to start by discussing that my dissertation project is actually part of a larger project that was made possible by several incredible UNLV researchers. So in addition to Doctors Farr and Flatt, I would also like to acknowledge and thank my committee members, Dr. Batra and Professor Gok. Thank you for all you do to support me and all you do within this area and beyond. Thank you too to Dr. Chen, Dr. Crystal Kittle, and Ravi Batra, who contributed so much time and expertise to this broader project. So let's first start by talking about human identity. Most birth certificates say male or female, but this doesn't capture the full range of biological diversity for many people. Many cultures recognized more than male or female. In many cases, Western colonialism erased these systems, replacing them with a rigid binary understanding of what it is to be a man or a woman. Additionally, some people are intersex. That is, they're born with physiological traits that don't fit neatly into a two-sex model. It's estimated that intersex people actually make up about 1.7% of the population, and this is about the same percentage of people born with red hair. In short, the two-sex model is an oversimplification of the complex biological reality of sex. Scientific research has shown that sex is not a strict binary, but rather a spectrum with various factors influencing its expression. Dr. Fuentes, an anthropologist at Princeton University, says, binary explanations are either incorrect or incomplete. Simplifying sex into a binary isn't about biology. It's about policing who counts as fully human in society. I also want to highlight a team of biologists from UC Berkeley, San Diego State, Loyola, and Duke. They say human rights cannot be solely defined by biology. This is the appeal to nature fallacy. Legislation targeting transgender and gender nonconforming people is increasingly undergirded with the simplistic binary model of biological sex. Our science is being weaponized to discriminate against marginalized groups. This binary fails to accurately capture the diverse and nuanced nature of sex. Now, to return to the continuum of identity, gender identity is our experience with gender and how we feel and who we authentically are. We may express our gender in a variety of ways, ranging from feminine to masculine or anywhere between or beyond. Sexual orientation, who we love or who we are attracted to, is another layer of identity. This brings us to the LGBTQIA+ acronym. The term has evolved and is often expanded to LGBTQIA+, with the plus sign meant to include a broader range of sexual orientations and gender identities. In short, human identity is complex and nuanced. Another few key terms for today. Cisgender refers to people whose gender identity matches the sex they were assigned at birth. Gender minority refers to people whose gender identity or expression doesn't align with societal expectations. Sexual minority refers to people whose sexual orientation varies from heterosexuality. Sexual and gender minorities, or SGM, is an umbrella term for LGBTQIA+ populations. And in this presentation, I'll be using LGBTQIA+, LGBT, and SGM. And I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of evolving language, and these terms may change and shift. So why does this research matter? The proportion of SGM individuals is increasing in American society. In the 12 years that Gallup polls have been tracking LGBT identification, it has nearly tripled from 3.5% of the population in 2012 to 9.3% of the population in 2024. For context, about 10% of people are left-handed. So we are talking about a large share of the population. As you can see, generationally, Gen Z and millennials report the highest rates of LGBTQIA+ identification. I want to add also that it's possible that this percentage is increasing in part because people feel safer and more accepted when it comes to identify themselves. And this may also be because these questions are finally being asked. But what happens when this stops? Cuts to research funding for marginalized communities are happening across the country. Even here at UNLV, our LGBT-focused research team lost millions of dollars in hard-won federal research grants for research on Alzheimer's disease and dementia and veterans. These cuts are harmful. They waste taxpayer dollars because now studies that have been years in the making, where's the return on investment? They undermine free speech. They invisibilize and they dehumanize. The LGBT community is a large, growing, and understudied community, and what we know and what the literature consistently shows is that in part because of harmful rhetoric and actions like this community shoulders disproportionate mental health burdens. LGBT individuals represented in navy on the graph are likelier than non-LGBT individuals who are represented in light blue to have mental health hardships such as anxiety, depression, and worry. Notably, LGBT people of color and trans people tend to report worse overall mental health outcomes. In a national survey of transgender people, while 41% of respondents reported having attempted suicide, 54% of transgender people of color reported the same, compared to just 1.6% of the general population. Among LGBT youth, the numbers are also devastating. I want to call your attention to the middle figure that I've circled. 40% of LGBT youth have seriously considered taking their own lives. As you can see, SGM mental health is an urgent public health crisis. I touched on this briefly a couple minutes ago, but what drives these disparities? The answer lies in stigma and discrimination. Stigma is negative, unfair beliefs attached to others, and discrimination is actionized stigma. These are negative attitudes that lead to groups being treated prejudicially or unfairly. It can take place at the individual, interpersonal level, but it can also be structural, meaning in the form of discriminatory laws and policies. According to Dr. Meyer's minority stress theory, health disparities in the LGBT community are largely caused by unique chronic stressors from discrimination and stigma that in turn lead to the development of mental health orders or substance misuse as a means to cope. Dr. Crenshaw's intersectionality theory shows us that if you're a part of multiple marginalized groups, say LGBT and a person of color, or LGBT and having a disability, the discrimination and stress compounds because you're now being subjected to multiple systems of oppression, such as racism or ableism, in addition to anti-LGBT bias. Dr. Bronfenbrenner's social ecological model, or SEM, shows that discrimination can happen at various social levels. So at the individual level, this can include self-stigma, as in negative attitudes that one has internalized from constantly being told that the way they are is wrong. It can take place at the interpersonal level, the relationship level. It could be being disowned by your family for being gay. At the community level, it could include not being able to be part of a church or organization due to your identity. And at the societal level, it can include discriminatory laws and policies, such as the executive branch trying to ban transgender troops from military service. Understanding where discrimination operates helps us to find points of intervention at all social levels by illuminating risk and protective factors. The pain associated with the stigma of being LGBT is traumatic. This quote encapsulates all the theories that I've discussed pretty well. Having to cope with the pain and stressors of stigma and discrimination leads to mental health disparities, as opposed to anything being inherently wrong with LGBT people. Headlines from decades ago, and sadly from today, as we're seeing all too often, show how dehumanizing rhetoric fuels stigma and discrimination. Words are important, media representation is important, and policy debates are important because they signal who belongs and who doesn't. And this in turn fuels discrimination against the LGBT community. So with regard to discrimination, over 1/3 of SGM adults reported discrimination in the past year, compared to less than 1/5 of non-SGM adults. 1/2 experienced employment discrimination, 1/3 experienced housing discrimination, 1/5 avoided medical care due to fears of being discriminated against, and 1/3 faced mistreatment by mental health providers. Highlighting the importance of intersectionality and the importance of understanding intercommunity disparities, discrimination is even higher among LGBT adults of color, LGBT adults with disabilities, and transgender, non-binary, and intersex adults. Another figure shows that 34% of LGBT adults reported being harassed or threatened at least a few times in the past year, compared to just 12% of non-LGBT adults, and this is a huge disparity. Black and Hispanic LGBT adults reported higher rates of discrimination tied to race or ethnicity than their non-LGBT counterparts. For example, 51% of Black LGBT adults versus 40% of Black non-LGBT adults reported past year discrimination, and both of these are extremely concerning figures. 39% of LGBT adults had a negative experience that made them less likely to seek care, compared to 15% of non-LGBT adults, despite this community experiencing higher rates of mental and physical health issues. Lastly, and on theme with this presentation, 34% of LGBTQIA+ adults report near daily worry or stress related to politics, compared to 19% of non-LGBT adults. And this was before 2024, 2025. Minority stress theory and intersectionality show how LGBT people are at increased risk of experiencing stigma and discrimination, with LGBT people of color being especially vulnerable. Discrimination hurts our health. It is associated with more physical injuries, higher stress hormone levels, and higher rates of heart disease. But it especially harms mental health, and it's linked to increased suicidality, PTSD, substance misuse, depression, anxiety, and distress. which brings me to my next slide. Distress is a more nebulous mental health concept because it touches on symptoms of depression and anxiety, and it can range from severe psychiatric illness to mild mental health symptoms. It can vary in intensity, including normal fears, feelings of sadness, and vulnerability, but it may also be debilitating. It is also a known risk factor for suicidality. Despite everything, there are protective factors that buffer against the harms of discrimination. So social safety nets, having supportive families and communities and peers that you can lean on. Resilience, the ability to adapt and recover in the face of adversity. And lastly, effective anti-discrimination laws and policies, which leads me to the next focus of this presentation. I'm gonna take a quick sip of water. Historically, LGBT people have experienced the criminalization of gender expression and same-sex intimacy. There is no legal recognition of same-sex relationships, and then there were few protections against discrimination in any sphere. So pictured here are Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, and these are two trans women of color who played pivotal roles in sparking the modern LGBT rights movement. So today we've seen major progress. Most Americans live in areas with clear, comprehensive protections against LGBT discrimination. The Supreme Court ruled that Title VII protects LGBT workers from discrimination, but there's also notable setbacks. In 2023, the Supreme Court in 303 Creative v. Ellenis allowed businesses offering expressive services to deny LGBT customers service, essentially giving a license to discriminate. And proposed anti-LGBT legislation actually tripled between 2022 and 2023. In 2022, there were 180 bills targeting LGBT state rights proposed in state legislatures across the US, and I remember being alarmed by that. But in 2023, that number has ballooned to 510. And that brings us to now. Currently, the ACLU is tracking 575 of these laws. And I want to note that it kind of goes up every day. When I first started this presentation, we were at 527. These proposed laws include undermining equal marriage protections, don't say gay bans at work and in schools, and threats to gender-affirming care. There are also numerous EOs and executive orders and policies at the federal level that it is honestly quite hard to keep up with all of them. I want to be clear that not all of these policies will become law, so I would now like to focus on laws that are currently in place. The Movement Advancement Project tracks existing laws and policies and assigns a score for positive or protective policies versus negative or harmful LGBT-related policies. So dark green means that there is a high overall protective policy tally, and the states with the high scores are actually in the West, so Colorado and California. And then the two lowest scored states are negative scores in both Tennessee and Alabama. So the red states are the ones that tend to have less protective policies in place. Laws deeply impact LGBT health. States with more protections have fewer poor mental health days and lower odds of depression. States allowing discrimination see increased mental distress. Our team found that familiarity with transgender sports bans, even if they weren't enacted and even if they weren't being proposed in a participant state, that raised suicidality among all LGBT people. And this shows how harmful the rhetoric is, let alone an enacted law. LGBT youth are particularly vulnerable. 27% report major mental health impacts from anti-LGBT laws. 2/3 say that don't say gay bills in their schools worsened their mental health. Yet, as of just a week ago, the federal government proposed defunding the LGBT Youth Crisis Hotline at a time when youth are in need of mental health supports, possibly now more than ever. Against this backdrop, my dissertation asked, what factors contribute to discrimination and discrimination-related distress among SGM individuals? In early 2022, our team developed and distributed an online cross-sectional survey with 1,033 SGM adults across the country. Qualtrics is the software that's used to create, distribute, and analyze surveys, and the Qualtrics research marketing team was commissioned to handle recruitment and data collection. Participants were recruited by Qualtrics through multiple avenues, including apps and games and social media platforms, and then eligible participants were provided incentives for participation. Predictors for this study were situated within the social ecological model, the SEM, with the goal being to determine factors impacting distress related to discrimination. For the statistical analysis, we entered data sequentially in blocks that aligned with the SEM levels. For the outcome variables, we used 8 subscales from the DHEQ, Daily Heterosexist Experiences Questionnaire. And these correspond to experiences that SGM people commonly face. So the vigilance subscale, for example, refers to heightened awareness and caution that LGBT people often maintain to navigate their daily lives and to be safe, to essentially make sure that they're not a victim of discrimination. Vicarious trauma is hearing about or witnessing harm to others within the community, such as stories about violence or even anti-LGBT legislation, because it reminds you that you could be next. Participants were asked if various experiences happened and how distressing they were, and some of these experiences included hearing about LGBT people you know being treated unfairly, hearing politicians say negative things about LGBT people, and being punched, hit, kicked, or beaten because you are LGBT. Individual level variables were demographics, so race, age, ethnicity, if individuals identified as having a disability, personal resilience, outness, the level to which their community knew about their identity. We also asked about mental health and perceived discrimination occurrences. At the relationship level, we looked at marital status as well as family resilience, so how well a family wraps around its LGBTQ family member. And we also looked at household members, so if there were children or adults present. At the community level, we looked at social support. So again, the folks that you can go to when times are hard, that you can lean on, that you can call up. And we also looked at region, which reflects community lived context, as regions often represent clusters of shared norms and attitudes. And then at the societal level, which reflects formal systems such as laws and policies, I selected the MAP state scores, so those protective or less protective state scores for each of the policies. And we also asked participants if they had seen ads or heard news supporting transgender sports bans. So I also used exposure to this rhetoric in the societal level. We emphasize sports bans because during survey development, they dominated national headlines and conversation. According to Catherine Oakley, Senior Counsel for the Human Rights Campaign, legislators in several states have admitted that there's no actual problems in their state that need to be addressed, as trans-inclusive policies have already been in place within several professional sports bodies, such as the Olympics, for years. She added, lawmakers' suggestion that students are trying to game the system for competitive advantage is nonsensical and impractical. It just does not happen. The impact on the trans community is terrible. It sends a message that people are unvalued and unloved while advancing hateful agendas. So an example of media promoting these bans included this billboard in Wisconsin. And there was also a corresponding TV ad. So this really shows how rhetoric spreads far beyond legislation itself. So this brings us to the final model building process based on the SEM levels. Just a quick note, when I say model, I'm basically referring to a statistical roadmap that helps us understand the relationship between different variables. In my case, I used models to look at how things like age, educational attainment, or exposure to rhetoric might predict discrimination and discrimination-related distress. Now, models don't give us absolute answers or show cause and effect, but they do help us to see patterns and test which factors matter the most. So for my dissertation, I used 2 different models to predict discrimination occurrences and discrimination distress. And the only difference was that the discrimination distress models also included discrimination occurrences as a hypothesized predictor of distress. So I kind of starred the model that we left out when we were predicting occurrences, because we didn't want occurrences to predict itself, essentially. So in total, I ran 18 models, but for the sake of time, I will discuss overall scores across all of the subscales. The majority of our participants were bisexual, and the average age was 39, so we had a largely middle-aged sample. The majority of participants identified as cisgender women. Our sample was predominantly white and predominantly non-Hispanic. Regional representation was highest from the South and the West, and 21 participants resided in Nevada. So after running the models, we found that identifying as a lesbian woman actually predicted more discrimination, but interestingly, as you can see on the other side, identifying as female was linked to experiencing less discrimination. Now, if you remember, the majority of our sample identified as bisexual and as women, as cisgender women, so this indicates, at least in our sample, that being a woman is protective against discrimination unless you identify as a lesbian woman. And this is supported in some studies in which lesbian women actually experience more discrimination than bisexual women, perhaps due to being more visible. Oops, just to touch on a couple more findings. Sorry, got a little excited. Being of Hispanic, Latinx, and Spanish origin predicted more discrimination, highlighting the salience of intersectionality and the impact of multiple minority stress. Higher education predicted more discrimination, and that was surprising to me, but it may be because education increases one's awareness about discrimination, and it could also be that those with more educational attainment are in more visible roles. Higher depression and suicidality levels predicted more discrimination, but it's important to note that we can't determine cause and effect. So, just relationships. So it's likely that discrimination predicts depression and suicidality, which is what we see in the literature. Having children in the home also predicted more discrimination, likely because LGBT parents face unique stressors and stigma. And then lastly, seeing transgender sports band ads predicted more discrimination. Now, as far as protective factors, getting older reduced discrimination risk, which is also supported in the literature. One study found that 80% of LGBT adults aged 18 to 29 reported discrimination versus half of those aged 30 and older. And higher levels of social resilience, or having networks and supports to lean on, was associated with experiencing less discrimination. We unfortunately didn't see any significant results that were associated with reduced discrimination-related distress, but we did find that higher levels of discrimination were related to experiencing greater distress, which of course intuitively makes sense, but we need to document this within the data first to address it. Higher resilience surprisingly correlated with more distress, likely because resilient helps you navigate hardships, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to experience them. And while overall resilience seems to reduce negative mental health outcomes in the literature, the relationship is pretty inconsistent, so we definitely need more research in this area. Also, being married predicted more distress, and this is potentially linked to experiencing negative events in employment or even in one's family, because there's an increased outing or visibility that accompanies being married. Higher levels of depression, anxiety, and suicidality were also linked with increased distress. Distress is often comorbid with other mental health problems, and again, there could be a reverse relationship happening here. And lastly, hearing about transgender sports ban legislation on the news was linked with experiencing more distress. So notably, experiencing discrimination occurrences predicted distress in every model. And then also, exposure to news or ads supporting sports bans predicted distress in 5 out of 9 of the models we ran, and predicted discrimination occurrences in 9 out of 9 of the models that we ran. So this suggests that rhetoric and media exposure have real measurable impacts, even beyond formally enacted laws. Notably, experiencing Okay. This is the first iteration of a survey like this that tried to capture the importance of rhetoric in addition to factors at a variety of interpersonal and structural levels. But I want it to be clear that this study is a first step. Future research should focus specifically on LGBT people of color and transgender individuals. We should also increase our sample sizes to reduce bias. And then this study took place during COVID-19, so we need additional time points for comparison, especially right now. It's also important to use focus groups and qualitative interviews to capture rich lived community experiences. And because there is arbitrary decision-making involved in building these models, it's important to test different models and variables. So what does this mean? Structural stigma and MAP scores were not significant predictors of discrimination or distress. It may be that structural stigma may not be as impactful as what you're experiencing day in and day out. Also, it may take time for these policy changes to actually have a measurable impact. In fact, one study found that LGBT individuals in states with more protective policies actually had greater odds of discrimination and victimization, perhaps because conversations about discrimination are taking place, so people feel empowered to label their experiences like, hey, that was definitely discrimination. State protections may thus increase reporting, but not necessarily incidents. Why? Harmful language surrounding anti-LGBT policies isn't just heard by LGBT people. It's heard by everybody. It's heard by those who may harbor biases and in turn feel like they have permission to discriminate. Hearing news reports or advertisements supporting transgender sports bans may signal to all LGBT community members, but especially trans people, that we are not safe or welcome. Regardless of if such laws become inactive, the rhetoric hurts LGBT people. So this leads us to the final portion of this presentation. What is policy's role in all of this? According to the Center for American Progress, when governments prioritize LGBT protections, perceptions of this community also change for the better. Equal rights are linked to a lower incidence of hate crimes, improved mental and physical health, decreased stigma, and they lead to significant economic benefits for everyone. Each additional right for sexual minority individuals in a given country is associated with a $320 increase in GDP per capita. Passing the Equality Act, which was reintroduced in 2023, would expand federal civil rights laws to protect LGBT people from discrimination in employment, housing, and federally funded programs, as well as in public places and spaces. It would help ensure that these benefits are realized nationwide and not just in certain states. I want to now focus on Nevada more specifically and acknowledge the many fantastic protections that we have here. So for example, we adopted the Equal Rights Amendment, which is written into our state constitution and says, people cannot be discriminated against based on race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. It is considered to be one of the most inclusive state-level equal rights amendments in the nation. Also in 2020, we became the first state to have equal marriage written into our state constitution, and we have banned conversion therapy to protect LGBT youth. In fact, 80% of LGBT youth in Nevada said that their community is accepting of LGBT people, which is awesome. Again, I'm really proud to live here. Nevada is one of the dark green states in the map, the giant map, it's dark green. It's not red, it's not yellow, it is dark green. It shows that we have some strong LGBT protections. With over 5% of our population identifying as LGBT, we are actually ranked 8th in the country for protective policies. In many ways, Nevada is a leader for LGBT rights, but we can still do better. And these are some of the changes that I would like to advocate for as I attend law school. I first want to focus on mental health. In 2002, Mountain West states had some of the lowest overall mental health rankings in the country, indicating a higher prevalence of mental illness and lower access to care rates. In Nevada, for every 460 Nevadans in need of mental health supports, there's one clinician. In 2021, our team conducted a needs assessment of 330 LGBT Nevadans. We found that the majority of our sample was moderately to highly stressed. Almost 70% met the criteria for depression. Over half experienced moderate to severe anxiety, and almost 50% experienced serious suicidal ideation. This is a huge issue, especially among our youth. According to the Trevor Project, LGBT youth in Nevada are also experiencing significant mental health challenges. 45% seriously considered completing suicide in the past year, and over 60% reported anxiety and depression symptoms, with trans and non-binary youth reporting even worse outcomes. Over half of LGBT young people report that political events negatively impact them. And nearly half wanted mental health care, but didn't receive it, underscoring the need for accessibility. So what can we do? Last year's Lang Fellow, Dr. Mallory Constantine, discussed how we can improve mental health systems here in Nevada. I highly recommend watching her presentation, but some of these recommendations include ensuring that behavioral health professionals are properly reimbursed by insurance. She also touched on doctoral level training for psychologists here in Nevada and advocated for more APA accredited internship sites and more postdoc opportunities locally. Also, the Nevada legislature is currently in its 83rd session, and all the bills I'm mentioning today appear to be progressing through the legislative process. SB 251 would allow doctoral interns and postdocs to be able to bill insurance for the services provided, which would help support the building of a training infrastructure. Also, AB 163 would allow Nevada to join the Counseling Compact, and this is an agreement among 37 states that also allows licensed professional counselors to practice across state lines without needing additional licensures. So while it will be important to ensure that these providers are culturally competent and comfortable working with LGBT patients, joining the compact would immediately expand access to qualified providers and would allow for telehealth. According to Silver State Equality, there are actually several pro-equality laws making their way through the legislature, which is awesome. A couple more I would like to highlight include SCR2, which would recognize the Fruit Loop as a historical landmark. And this area is right near campus. It's Harmon and Paradise. It's fun. This area is known for LGBT businesses and nightlife. And this bill's awesome because we know the importance of being part of the historical record and visibility. And LGBT history is Nevada history. AB 416 would protect against LGBT and other books with diversity, equity, and inclusion themes from being banned from schools and libraries, as these book bans are currently happening in other states. SB 352 would prohibit public and private health insurance policies, including Medicaid, from discriminating against any person on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So again, Nevada is really a leader in this area. I now want to turn our attention back to MAP really quick and discuss some areas that our state can bolster protections. And I also want to talk about why this matters. One study found that protective policies in states improved the well-being of LGBT people. Every 1 point increase in policy score reduced physical and mental health burdens, whereas LGBT people in states with fewer protections reported worse general, mental, and physical health. Another study found that LGBT older adults in states with fewer protections were more likely to report poor general health and frequent physical health issues. Lack of inclusive policies were associated with higher health risks, while stronger anti-discrimination laws were linked to better health outcomes. In other words, implementing the following laws and policies could help improve health outcomes for LGBT Nevadans, but there are also broader benefits, such as the economic benefits that I touched on previously, that would benefit everybody. The first law I would like to discuss is gender-affirming shield care laws. Gender-affirming shield laws are probably one of the most urgent policy needs right now. Here's why. If someone travels from a state where transgender healthcare is banned and receives care in another state, a shield law can actually protect both the person receiving care and the provider of that care from being targeted with civil or criminal charges by their home state. Now, just to step back briefly, let's talk about what gender-affirming care actually is. It's life-saving, evidence-based medical care that has been shown to reduce suicidality, depression, and anxiety while improving quality of life and mental health. Some of the major organizations that endorse gender-affirming care include the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, and the World Health Organization. Also, studies show that regret after receiving this care is extremely rare, with an estimated regret rate of under 2%, which is actually much lower than regret rates from common surgeries like knee replacements or bariatric surgeries. Importantly, evidence-based guidelines are already in place to prevent irreversible medical interventions without careful consultation and informed consent. For minors, for example, puberty blockers, which are fully reversible, are often the first step. The bottom line is that gender-affirming care is life-saving, it's medically necessary, and it's overwhelmingly supported by those who receive it. And while many of our neighboring states in the Great West have passed shield laws, Nevada currently has no such protections, but SB 171 is currently moving through the legislative process. And I want to note that this bill did pass both houses in 2023, but was ultimately vetoed. So fingers crossed for a better outcome this time. With regard to confirmatory adoption, Nevada does have robust adoption laws in place that benefit LGBT families, but unlike California and Colorado, we do not have confirmatory adoption. Now, this is a streamlined process that confirms parentage of non-gestational, non-biological parents and would be a faster process to validate and protect LGBT families in the eyes of the law. And it looks like AB 227 would establish procedures for confirmatory adoption. So as you can see, Nevada really, I am so proud to live here. We have a lot of great bills going on. And it looks like we're really trying to protect our LGBT Nevadans here. Nevada does protect students in many ways, such as having anti-bullying laws on the books. And unlike other states, we do not force schools to automatically out students to their parents or guardians. However, it appears that the ability for the school to actually use a student's chosen name and pronoun may require parental consent. So balancing student and parental rights is pretty challenging, and this is what California is doing. The SAFETY Act, which went into effect this year, is an example of a formal law that clearly prevents forced outing. This is important because just 1 in 3 LGBT youth report that their home is LGBT affirming. Having a similar law in place here could better protect LGBT youth who we have seen are already very vulnerable. Lastly, while we do have really great protections here in Nevada, the situation can erode. For example, the Nevada Interscholastic Activities Association just reversed its 2014 policy and now bans trans athletes from playing girls' sports. This legislative session, we also have sports ban bills in the Senate and Assembly, but it appears that they thankfully did not advance. But again, we know how harmful the rhetoric is. And this leads me to people, perhaps unexpected ones, pushing back against these harmful bills. In Utah, a sports ban bill passed and was subsequently vetoed by Governor Spencer Cox. In his statement, he identified 75,000 high school kids playing sports in Utah, including 4 trans kids, one of whom was playing girls' sports. 1 out of 75,000. Although his veto was eventually overridden, his statement is powerful. 4 kids and only one of them playing girls' sports. That's what all of this is about. 4 kids who aren't dominating or winning trophies or taking scholarships. 4 kids who are just trying to find some friends and feel like they are part of something. 4 kids trying to get through each day. Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. I don't understand what they are going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live. And all the research shows that even a little acceptance and connection can reduce suicidality significantly. I have taken this action in the hope that we can continue to work together and find a better way. I hope we can work to find ways to show these 4 kids that we love them and they have a place in our state. My advisor used this quote in one of her presentations, and no matter how many times I read it, it just gives me chills. I also want to highlight Larry Jones. Last month, 85-year-old Larry Jones attended a hearing in Wisconsin to support a bill that would ban gender-affirming care for trans youth. But after listening to 7 hours of testimony, he signed up to speak at the hearing. He said the following: "I have very little knowledge of gay people, so when I came here, my eyes were opened. I was one of the critics that sat on the sidelines and made the decision that there's only 2 genders, so I got an education here today that was unbelievable. My perspective for people has changed. I'd like to apologize for being here, and I learned a very lot about this group of people." Jones later told reporters that he doesn't think he did anything out of the ordinary, and he felt like he had to speak and owed it to the people who were there protesting the bill. So while we may be experiencing significant attempts to undermine rights, these acts are not going unchallenged across party lines, in the judiciary, and at the grassroots levels. The rhetoric we are hearing is dangerous, and it reinforces that LGBT people, and especially transgender individuals and youth, are others, that we don't belong, and that we are less than. But for every negative article I read, and there are so many, I can easily find another about someone standing up, a judge, a lawmaker, or even an everyday person like Larry Jones in Wisconsin. The importance of protective laws and policies, even if their laws are not immediately felt, cannot be overstated. Protective laws and policies have the power to change social norms and ultimately to reduce stigma against the LGBT community, improving overall health outcomes. Nevada is a leader for LGBT rights. It is imperative that we bolster existing mental health infrastructure by increasing access to culturally competent providers, reinforce existing protections and adopt new safeguards, and reject harmful policies and rhetoric. Thank you for listening today, and please email me if you would like to read my dissertation in the summer. And sorry I got so warm up here, you guys. Those lights,
There's a lot of lights up here. So a couple of pieces of business before we go. First, if you do have questions, should be available after for a few minutes.
Yes.
For that. Second thing is, I gotta get this out. We wanted to present you. With this plaque in recognition of your
You guys
fellowship.
did so much for me already. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And this is an annual award. So next year we will have another fellow, and she is with us today. I'd like you to see Celine Fuller right there. She will be our next year's Lang Fellow. And like Rob Lang, she is completing a PhD in sociology. She's also currently working as a research assistant across the street at the Cannabis Policy Institute. So next April, we expect you all back here for Celine's lecture there. So I want to thank again everybody for taking the time out of your day to come here. Thank you for your support. If you'd like to contribute to the fellowship, I believe there's the code on there. But again, thank you so much, and thank you to Emylia for a wonderful presentation. Yeah.